What's up, y'all? It's Zach with Living Corporate. Man, really exciting times. I mean, exciting is a word for it, right? Like, got some concerns with the coronavirus, people working from home, new ways of working, impacting marginalized folks in different ways. So definitely expect for our content to shift a little bit. So we're talking about and sharing tips on working from home and how to work from home, dealing with managers, leading teams if you're working from home, and also dealing with managers who maybe have never had to manage you as you work from home. But all of that to say, we continue to roll with the punches, y'all. And look, it's Tuesday. We're having another conversation, real talk in the corporate world. We do this, right? Like, we sit down with Black and brown entrepreneurs, executives, CEOs, right? Who are also executives, but you know what I mean. Advocates, allies, public servants, elected officials. And look, today is no different. Like, we have a great guest, Debra Gore-Mann. Debra is the president and CEO of the Greenlining Institute, a policy, research, organizing, and leadership institute working for racial and economic justice. Woo! Justice. That's a heavy word in these diversity and inclusion streets. And here they are. And here we go. Debra, welcome to the show, ma'am. How you doing?
Hi, Zach. Thanks so much for inviting me. I too am sitting in, troubling times in that I'm a decision maker on whether to work from home or whether to continue to bring folks into work. So I hear you on your opening.
Yeah. I mean, to your point about being a decision maker, I'd love to talk about your journey, right? Like, you've held a variety of different roles, from investment banking to being in athletics to being a chief development officer. Like, I'd love to hear more about your path. Like, and as Living Corporate, and I think as we all continue to have these conversations, we've been blessed to talk to people with really unique journeys, right? And it seems as if, honestly, the people that are making the most impact have some of the most, initially on the outset, just curious paths to getting there. I'd love to hear more about just your story.
Oh, absolutely. And I think my journey is, I used to think that it was unique, but then the more that I've shared it, the more I realize that there are just some pivotal moments that happen. And so that happened to me. So in my journey, I'm biracial. My mother is Japanese and my father is Black, and he was in the military. And I know for some folks, when you say the military, it means, it's a significant sort of life experience to have a parent who is in the military. So he meets my mother in Japan. And so, she comes to the United States. And so she was an immigrant. So I kind of speak that space. And in our house was very much, a bicultural home. I mean, we ate as much Asian food or Japanese food as we ate soul food. So, it was nothing for us to have, sushi with collard greens, so to speak.
Y'all mixed it together?
Yeah, totally. My mom just did both. But the one thing that was sort of emphasized in our house was education.
Yeah.
And equally from my father's side, Black household as the Asian side. I did have a bit of a tiger mom, so people might know what that means. Education was important. And so, really kind of overachieved in that space. And here was one of these critical, pivotal moments, right? So finishing high school, I'm literally the number 2 in my class. I think they call it the salutatorian. And my best friend was the number 3 person in the class. And I'm going to apply for colleges, and the story she gets, and she's German but white, and the story I get when we compare notes are completely different. I'm told to go to a community college. My family can't afford to send me to college, but this would be a good stepping stone. I mean, it was a very positive conversation. And then I compare with my friend Lily, and she's like, she told me that I should apply to, some of the best schools on the West Coast, but in particular, because I'm originally from Seattle, Tacoma, the University of Washington or the University of Oregon, totally different story. And so, we're sort of going, yeah, this is because you're Black. And I'm like, yeah, it is. But, I didn't know. I hadn't gone to college. My sister, I had an older sister, and she went because through the PSAT, somebody offered her a full scholarship. So I thought that's how it happened. Well, lo and behold, her brother had gone to MIT. He comes home during that winter break, and he says, oh, no, you guys you're number 2, you're number 3 in the class. You guys are applying to Ivy Leagues. And we're like, what's an Ivy League school? Because our counselor didn't tell us anything like that. And so I ended up applying to Stanford, Harvard, Princeton, Caltech, University of Michigan, right? Sort of high technical schools, high academic schools. She applies to Yale, Harvard. We still apply to our local school, University of Washington. I also played basketball, so that's going to come in here.
Yes.
So I had some athletic scholarships as well, and ended up we got into, I want to say, 9 out of 10 of the schools we applied to.
Wow.
She ended up going to Yale, and I ended up going to Stanford.
Okay.
And that in and of itself, so if you're in an Asian household, for the daughters to leave the home is sort of bad daughter, not disobedient. So my mother was like, you're not, she doesn't know Stanford from anything else. She's like, you're not going to California, you're a bad daughter.
Wow.
So my first courageous step was to say, I'm going to go to this school. It's in California because of my good friend's brother who was like, this is one of the top schools in the country. You need to go.
Right.
So that's my first sort of, accidental but intentional advice that I got. And then going to Stanford, really kind of changed my life from there. Opened up a whole new dialogue, really started to understand my biracialness. Now we have a term, intersectionality. At the time, intersectionality was not necessarily as bright and clear, but really started to understand that, and had an engineering degree, worked at a tech company, a material science tech company when I graduated. Then I went back to graduate school, back to Stanford, and got my MBA. And at that time, I gotta be honest, I was really motivated by money. We were a lower middle class. My dad was in the military. My mother worked as a domestic housekeeper, so I was cleaning houses, helping her clean houses from a very early age. So I can clean a mean bathroom now to this day.
To this day.
To this day. You don't want me to come visit your house.
I might.
I need to clean this bathroom. And so it was really kind of, important for me to sort of maximize my value. So I went to Wall Street. I went to work at an investment bank, and even then realized, let me take a step back. Another circumstance that happened when I went to graduate school, I ended up being the only Black female in that class. And this is, 1987. So, but what happened when I went to admissions, and I was like, how could I only be the Black woman in my class? Yeah. There was about 25 to 28 of us who had applied, but we all applied at very competitive. So Wharton, Harvard, Princeton, or the top business schools, Wharton, Northwestern, and the rest, the other 24 went to all the other schools. Wow. I was the only one that year that picked Stanford. So here I'm in a class, where I'm the only sort of Black female voice. It seemed like every class is like, well, what does Debbie think? What does Debbie? I was like,
you become the representative.
I'm the representative. I'm like the sole rep. But I'm still identifying as biracial. I was like, why don't y'all care about my Japanese lineage? But in any case, right, so land squarely in that. And what really helps me navigate that was that I played basketball. And we would have these pickup games, and I would, be balling with the rest of the white guys who are now, running companies, running venture capital. But sports was my translator and my equalizer.
Okay.
And so I've always very much leaned into sports vernacular and ability. And I think that has served me well, frankly, in my corporate leadership and everything, to be able to talk sports. And I mean, like really talk sports. Has really helped.
Now, what position did you play? Not to cut you off. What position did you play?
I was a point guard.
Okay, so now, how would you characterize your game? Were you like a combo, or were you like a facilitator?
No. Yeah, so I was definitely a floor general. I didn't shoot as much, but a lot of assists. Okay. Played all 40 minutes. Okay. Started as a freshman all 4 years. Last 2 years team captain. Okay. So I think the leadership stuff kind of developed there. Played a lot with men. I think that's a common thread with women who really sort of want to elevate their game, playing against people or bigger, quicker, stronger,
Sure.
gets the game up there. But, so I'll make analogies. I was actually talking to a coalition person and they have a very strong coalition. And I said, well, here's my analogy. I'm like Kevin Durant coming to the Warriors after you guys won a couple. And that frames it, right? People you meet it like, oh yeah, like we're balling, but look, I got some skills and I can come and please, let's just try to win some more championships. And so sometimes those sports analogies, people are like, oh, I get what you're talking about.
Put it together, yeah.
Yeah, and then you also don't sound, it's pretty arrogant to say, like, I'm Kevin Durant. Like, I'm not Kevin Durant, but people understand there's a skill set
that
coming
you're bringing to the table.
Game.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And so I tend to do that. So anyways, I go to Wall Street, and that was yet another environment where I'm, very few, let's see, in that cohort, I was the only African-American woman in that cohort. And then Wall Street is, definitely... I always tell people until you make some money, you can walk away from money. So I was able to, buy a home, help my family. My father had passed, so I was able to help my mom with her house. It had a portfolio of investments and could, really speak money and capital and understanding that. But after I made some money, I was like, wow, this is not very fulfilling. This is, what have you done for me lately? What's your last transaction?
Yeah.
And, you're constantly just pushing the rock up the hill. Mm. So at that point, then I stayed in the private sector and I used my engineering degree with my finance. And in the Bay Area, there's a company called Bechtel, who is a large engineering infrastructure company, family owned, and they have an in-house boutique financial arm. And because I had engineering and I had finance, I went to work for that in-house boutique bank.
Okay.
And the beauty of that is it's a global company. So I had a passport, and for 5 years I worked out of the country.
Wow.
China was opening up in some of their enterprise zones, a lot in Latin America, South America, and did these large structured finance in foreign currency. So the multitasking, the language, the currency, was sort of complicated transactions, and love that work, love that work. And then the big pivot was I got married and I had a child.
Congratulations.
And for women, that's a big deal. Even for me at the time, I had worked on a big multi-billion-dollar deal in Mexico, and they weren't going to let me have maternity leave. They didn't have maternity leave, actually.
Okay.
So we crafted, I had accelerated some deals that I had done, so killed myself working 100 hours so that I could take 3 to 4 months off.
Wow.
Yeah. There wasn't. So when people talk about maternity leave and FMLA, and I was like, yes, where do I sign up? This is some of the policy work, right? That now I'm all in, because I lived through a time when women didn't have that, no matter how big my deal was, no matter how, I could be straight balling. It's like, there's no maternity leave.
Right.
And the big fear was that I wasn't going to come back to work, that I was going to love motherhood. And I was like, maybe. I didn't know. I hadn't had a child.
Sure.
So sure enough, I get my 4 months off and really missed working. So to the women who listen to your podcast, I think that will resonate. It's like either, the maternal part is like, oh, I love being at home, and I love that too, but I really had this desire to keep working.
Yeah.
And for me at that time, then I couldn't just get on an airplane, be gone 2 or 3 weeks, because I'd come back and my daughter was, talking or rolling over,
milestones.
And I come home, and I was like, no. So I always, I don't know how much space or people have talked to you about, your network is your net worth.
Yeah.
So I leaned into my network and I said, look, y'all, I need a job in the United States. Let's keep it simple. In the United States. But if it could be in California, all the better.
Right.
and different kinds of, opportunities came in, and it was someone in my network that said, hey, you went to Stanford twice, and the athletic department's looking for a CFO. And I had done enough structured deals, right, that we had some development companies, and I had served as the financial officers in some DevCos. So, and I said, oh, okay, let me interview. So you'll love this, Zach.
Okay.
So I go into this interview. The athletic director at the time was Ted Leland, who was probably one of the top 5 athletic directors in the country.
Okay.
The faculty athletic rep was Jerry Porras, and he had co-written the book Built to Last, which was a bestseller, with Jim Collins, who then wrote Good to Great.
Yes.
He's the faculty athletic rep.
Wow.
And then the provost is this, this black professor who's up and coming named Condi Rice.
What?
So I am interviewing at the time, though. Now, come on now, we're in the 90s. At the time, I'm like, okay, athletic director, sports, small field.
Right.
I've been doing global deals. My deals were in the Wall Street Journal and Financial Times. I'm like, oh, isn't that quaint? He's an athletic director. Now, Jerry Porras, I'm like, okay, you kind of balling. You're writing bestsellers. Right. You're Latin. First of all, you're a Latino male. Mm-hmm. Who's a tenured professor at Stanford. So I got a white male who went to community college and now is the athletic director at Stanford. I have a Latino male. And then this African-American professor, Russian studies. I was like, oh. So, think about the diversity of that right there.
Yeah.
Think of the diversity.
That's
Black
incredible.
woman, Latino male, white man. And they are going to be the nucleus. So they say, talk the talk about, okay, this is how I would do the athletic department. And as a CFO and how I'd run it. And they were like, this is great. We'd like to offer you the job. And I was like, great. What's the pay? It was like a 50% pay cut. Ugh. And I was like, oh, yeah, no. Remember, even when I was an undergrad, I was like, yeah, I got to make some money. Yeah. And I'm taking care of my family. Right. And then at this point, I'm now sandwiched. I'm taking care of both my own family and then my mother. So we're kind of that sandwich generation.
Yeah.
So I'm like, thank you so much. Here's my dilemma. I can't take the pay cut. It's too much of a pay cut.
Yeah.
And I thought it was done, right? So I'm like moving on. I'm interviewing other places. I almost went into consulting. I get a call back from Ted who said, we want you to interview one more person. I was like, and he said, no, just go on this one more interview. And I end up interviewing with the vice president of finance. And they're thinking that the athletic department reported to the position in the finance office. And so he interviews me and he says, look, I'm going to give you this job and this job. So when I joined Stanford, I held the position in the athletic department and I held a position in the university, which allowed them to basically double my salary and keep me whole. So I was just like, wow, so another pivotal kind of, and that's the transition. Like the transition, I think a lot of people might have to take a pay cut or whatever, but I kind of feel like, well, my toolbox was pretty robust. I could speak the sports language. I had been speaking the sports language as through my whole financial. So when it came to interviewing this completely different industry, I was able to translate and transfer those skills. And then, got into, so that's my pivot into college sports. And my real first exposure into sort of diversity of thought.
Yeah.
Equity, what does that look like for women of color? There was a real commitment to Title IX. Stanford was one of the first schools, and I was that first generation that got the title. I literally, those scholarships came out in 81, so I'm dating myself now, and I was the first generation to get Title IX scholarship, full scholarship.
Wow. So
I've been in this space, right? I've been in this equity, justice, racial, just living it.
Right.
And so, just fast forward, I did, sort of run the gamut in athletics. And when this opportunity at the Greenlining Institute opened up, it is the single place where I have been able to unapologetically, openly talk about racial equity in all forms, and my work is to remove those barriers and to provide economic opportunity. So I'm still true to my message of, okay, we got to develop personal wealth, community wealth, and then remove these the racial barriers. And it's full stop, redlining, community development, all of the things that are, affordable housing, healthcare, all of the intersections now. And I just do it full throated. So there you go. There it is, Zach. There's the journey.
That's incredible. And what's interesting is, you talk about dating yourself, but what I hear in that, though, is the fact you've lived this life and you're doing this work like beyond the buzzwords of today, right? So today when we talk about diversity and inclusion, or we talk about equity, in a corporate context, where we don't really mean making people whole, driving for just like creating paths to justice, or like systemic change, right? We're not really talking about that. Like, not really, not in the average diversity, equity, inclusion conversation. We're typically talking about some type of training and some communications. And so what I'm really excited about as we kind of get into this interview is like more about the work and where you see the Greenlining Institute going. And to that end, in a piece that you wrote for the Greenlining Institute announcing your arrival to the organization, you said, a portion of what you wrote, I'm going to read it here, quote, "People would argue that a focus on the building of a nation through a specific lens of color and race only hinders progress. They are the people who often claim to not see race and who replace the slogan Black Lives Matter with All Lives Matter. I'm not one of those people." So let me keep it 100 with you. When I read this, right, and I recognize you work for the Greenlining Institute, and I recognize that you've been in places where you've practically drove and you've strived for creating equity for your constituents or stakeholders or whoever the people that you're serving are. I'm going to still say I still don't see a lot of Black executives who boldly engage topics of race, like be it from a position of self-preservation or a lack of personal range. But, I think about Howard Bryant of ESPN and NPR. He was on the show a while back. And he said, to advocate for Black people is to put your whole career in jeopardy. And so I'm just really curious, like, when did you make a decision to not only discuss Black equity in these like theoretical frames, but leverage your own capital and labor to help solve for it, and have, in your career, right, have you had colleagues discourage you from pursuing this type of work?
So I totally understand what Howard Bryant is saying when he says Black people have to put their career in jeopardy. No doubt, right? It's the judgment against Michael Jordan that he did no political advocacy. Yeah. But now, a generation later, like it's fine for LeBron James to do it, actually. And, even Steph Curry or Steve Kerr, I mean, they're openly in this space now. So I think it is the times that you live in that affect it. I constantly had people who discouraged me if I wanted to, have my career ascend or be eligible for large bonuses. There was a bit of imposter syndrome that, you had to perpetrate. So the people usually who were discouraging of speaking boldly into race and gender and the intersectionality that I survive in were mostly white people. Yeah. Right. So they were making it clear to me of the risk. Like, you can do it, Debbie. You can talk about this. You can talk about that. But I'm just going to tell you what may be the consequences of it. So I think there is some truth for sure to what Howard Bryant was saying. The flip side is, so when do you have the courage then to go ahead and put my career on the line? Like,
Yeah.
I don't, give an F. Here we go. And this is what's going to just strip you out of that. So the moments that I've been able to do that most boldly was when I was encouraged and had the support of mentors who, the Condi Rices or the Ted Lelands, or I can name 2 or 3 people who were mentors who said, look, go ahead, speak your truth, and I got your back on this one. So there, for example, when I was at Stanford, I had been there maybe 4 or 5 years, and I had done the first big Nike deal. They had never done a big Nike deal and got one of the largest campus deals ever. Pepsi, at that time, the soda wars were happening in your facilities, so we negotiated that. I had negotiated 2 very high-profile coaches contracts.
Wow.
So my credibility on campus was pretty legit. And this new dean of the medical school really wanted to have the orthopedics department sort of be a partner with the athletic department, because think about the athletes, at that time, Tiger Woods, John Elway, like we had some, they still have some very high profile athletes there. So I had met with the chief of orthopedics, and I was like, oh, it was a great meeting, very white male, very, very white, great. So I'm code switching, I'm doing all the things that I do to make sure that he's comfortable.
Okay.
And after that meeting, he goes back to the dean and says, I think she's going to be a problem, or something to that effect. So then 2 of our medical doctors who had been doing all of our surgeries, knee, shoulder, elbows, came back, and one who I trusted, we had a very, obviously, if you're dealing with young people's bodies and those families, so I tended to be the person who talked to the family and, said, hey, this is our expert. He came to me and he told me, he said, so this dean, they have some concerns about the relationship. And I said, this isn't about the relationship. This is about me.
Right.
I said, this is this white guy who's not comfortable. And I sat there and I was fuming and went to the athletic director and went to the faculty athletic rep, and they were like, oh, no, we're going all in. Right. Yeah. But they had to, I probably would not have, had I not had their voices behind me.
Yeah.
And so we did. We met with the dean, and I asked some very, pointed questions.
Sure.
Where was this concern coming from? I had the faith of the coaches, the head coaches, and the faculty athletic rep, and X, Y, and Z, and where was this voice coming from? And he was just sort of, well, I kind of heard you. Did I say that? No, but it was in you. And so I was just like, I think this is racial.
Yeah.
I think it's both racial and gender. I think I'm a woman with influence. This is important to your career that you sign this athletic department. And, and then it was immediately, he was apologetic, and that's not what I meant. And I was like, that's fine. That's fine. I'm just telling you how you're presenting yourself and what that means to me and my career.
Right.
But I don't know that I would have stepped out on that branch on my own. I think if I'd have just walked that, my career might have been at risk. And,
sure.
And but knowing that I had 2 very senior people say, we got you on this, was important. And so the advice that I do tend to give now is that, everybody, a young professional, mid-year professional, I think everybody should have an advisory council.
Yeah.
Where you have somewhere between 3 and 5 people that you have literally asked to be a mentor, who has some sort of credibility and clout, who can advise you on when to make these very hard decisions. I've had an advisory council ever since, and it's changed depending on the industry that I'm in. And I tend to have 3. I used to have 5. And you want an odd number in case there's a tie,
Yeah.
If you have one say yes and the other say no, you need that third one to say yes or no to break the tie. But then that'll help you temper, your career advice with the steps you need to take when you have to fight the good fight. And I know now that I don't know where he is in his career, but I guarantee you he will he'll think twice, about, oh, am I doing this because I have some gender bias, because I have some racial bias?
Right.
Like he had been comfortable in that space and he had done his thing, and he probably had run over a bunch of black people. Right. And he finally ran into somebody who said, this ain't right. And then had other people sit in the room with me and say, you're not right. So those moments are, sort of life-changing, but they're done with courage, for sure. My voice was quivering, my knees were shaking, and I was like, but I'm going all in. I'm going all in on this one.
And I bet you felt all the better for it after the conversation too.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it made the next conversation easier,
Right.
you know, to tell, once you do it, you realize that the house didn't fall in,
Right.
or that your career didn't implode.
Right.
Now, you know, had it imploded, maybe I had a different tack. But then, you know, now I'm able to sit in a room and say, well, you know, are you sure that's what you mean? You know, I kind of hear, and I feel like you have some bias here, and, you know, and now I'm that voice for the whole community. I'm like, look,
right.
you know,
This
you
one's
are
not
racial. You are racial washing. You are equity washing right now.
Wow.
People of color and
Yeah.
affordable housing. This is about segregation. Let's call it what it is. They don't want to put affordable housing on BART stars because in Lafayette, a lot of white people live there, and they want to live in segregated communities. Come on. So I can just speak it now and say, you know, to policymakers or banks or corporations or City Hall and say, look, I disaggregated this. We have disaggregated this. Here's the bias that still lives. What are you going to do? And here's how we're going to help you do it. So we have a whole framework that we say, okay, this is how you dismantle it, and this is how we're going to build it back up.
I think that work, it's just the work itself is so incredible. It's like, because, you know, even if you just look from like a historical perspective, right? So like, what, black folks have had the same rights on paper for like 54, 56 years. And so I think about the fact that, one, that's not even a whole lifetime, right? But then on top of that, like, because of that fact, really, Gen X is like the first generation of people who were born into this country with all of their rights. And really, even millennials, a lot of these people are, myself included, like first generation corporate professionals. And so I thought about that side a lot, like the fact that a lot of black and brown folks is their first time really even being in these spaces. But I haven't thought about it until recently, Debra, is that this, for white people, this is their first time dealing with black people in these spaces. And when they go home and they talk to their colleagues or their older mentors, they don't really, I mean, they're not going to get a perspective that isn't within a context that is formalized anti-blackness, right? You think about, like, if I wasn't a first generation professional, I'll talk to my uncle. He could give me context on just working in majority white spaces. He could do that. But if I was white and I'm dealing with you in this space, and I go and I talk to my uncle, he's not gonna, he very well likely is not gonna have anything to teach me or tell me about, like, oh, well, this is how you need to be self-aware, and this is how these cultures work, and, you know. So I find that really curious, and you answered one of my questions. I want to ask this one though, because you touched on a little bit, is what does it look like, right, to build relationships across the various types of circles that you have to engage, right? I think about the fact that when you're talking about policy, and you're talking about shifting and creating systemic change, like you have, I would imagine there's some grassroots folks that you have to engage and endear. But then there's also corporate entities who influence the actual policies, right? I would imagine you're talking to some billionaires, but then you're also having conversations with activists, and you're also talking to folks in the government. Like, what does it look like to manage that wide array of philosophies, motivations, and personalities? How does that practically show up?
I do think there has to be this consistency in philosophy. Like, you have to really be grounded in your values. Because once people start challenging you, right? So if you truly believe that there's systemic racism in not just the policy, but in the cultural diatribe of pull yourself up from the bootstraps, poor people are poor because they're lazy. Like, that's a whole capitalistic trope. And if you want to really dismantle the conversation, then you have to have clarity that that is what's happening. Because it is so easy to get on you can make money if you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right. The Christian Protestant work ethic.
Right.
Look, that is a construct to keep the segregation as status quo.
Yeah.
So when you're, in either the corporate office or even in the Capitol, you start to have this conversation about where are your values. So if a person is leading with I believe you can pull yourself up in the bootstraps. I know that they have such a long way to go before they can even have a conversation about racial equity. That foundational conversation. So I start there.
Right.
I start there. So let's say even now. So if you're a digital native and you've been sort of, raised that you probably, think, okay, I have all these online tools and the analogs are not non-biased. Okay, let's just disaggregate that. Right now, there's more loans that are, let's just say your car loan, right?
Yeah.
Or your home loan. It used to be about 4 to 5% done online. It's darn near 35% online now.
Yeah.
And that information shows there's so much racial bias. Black and brown people pay 100 to 200 basis points more. Their loan interests are higher. So the algorithm, which has been written by white men who are in that space,
yes,
the algorithm has bias. No, it's neutral. No, it's based on zip code. It's based on spending habits. It's based on, because now they have all this big data tracking you. All of that is racially biased because it's founded in this language of if you work hard, you get educated, then you deserve.
Yeah, this idea of meritocracy.
And that is the racial construct. So we are now having this conversation about, okay, what does wealth mean? Okay, wealth, let's just, most we think, what's in my bank account? I have a house. Yeah. Wealth is I have the freedom to take a vacation. Yeah. I have the ability to take a week off if my family is sick. I have the ability to cover a bill. If it's, a health bill, an automobile breakdown, a home thing, that is wealth. So if you say, and people say, oh yeah, everybody should have the right to do that. You should have the right to be able to visit family, or you should have the right to be able, okay. So then you say, what does that policy look like to allow us to do that? Yeah. So I don't really actually have to talk race. I don't. I need to talk about a culture, a narrative. Like we have to take command of a narrative, which is coming. Like this whole political race, this presidential race pivoted on South Carolina and black voting. Yeah. Like changed the landscape. So and for the first time, Ta-Nehisi Coates testified with Danny Glover around reparations. Yeah. Like people are willing to say, wait, what is this? And we have video now of police abuse and, and we're unpacking the criminal justice system. Like there's an opportunity for us to walk into this space, which at the end of the day will affect your corporate life and will allow you to show up authentically. And all the data shows that a business decision made with diverse voices in the room, diverse ethnicities in the room are going to get you better business decisions. Mm-hmm. So I can even talk to you on, if you just want to talk pure capitalism, like, hey, the system that, you white boys built is breaking down. So you at least got to admit, you got to consider another system. Right. Like you got to figure out, just even from an economic basis, that what we have now is not going to persist. It's not. It's collapsing on itself. And now, we have this, and it might happen in a generation that we're going to create a new landscape of what wealth and economic opportunity looks like.
I mean, typically we do sound effects in the show. Like right here, I just want to drop like a flex, like boom, sound man. He gonna put it in this. Put it in there right here. I mean, it's just incredible. You're absolutely right. And I'm really curious, like kind of continuing along the last part that you said. In January, you wrote something called "The Many Reasons to Impeach Trump." Right?
The many impeachment.
Yes,
the many, not the three they landed on.
Not the couple, not the few, the many.
The many.
And you wrote, for communities of color, Trump has long since violated our public trust, and we know that a multitude of possible articles were excluded. So, we're in an election year, right? Like, if Trump is elected for a second term, how do you anticipate Trump's policies practically impacting the efforts of the Greenlining Institute's goals?
Actually, the Trump administration has emboldened the political conversation. We are in more demand now because of the contrast. Before, there wasn't as much contrast. It was, everybody was kind of in the gray. We were kind of all getting along.
We got a black president. There's no more racism.
Right. We had arrived. And now the contrast is so stark that, everybody kind of knows this doesn't feel right. Yeah. And so it's like, what does right feel like? And we feel like we need to occupy that space of, okay, here is what, racial equality looks like. Here is what right feels like. And let's redefine, because he's offering you a model. This is what the model looks like. I talk crazy. I put down whoever I feel like putting down. It always is racialized. I'm a model. Look at me. I'm an economic model. And understand, it is an economic model. He does not stand on any values. He does not stand on any religious. It's like transactional. Here's how much. I just got a couple $2 billion from Israel. I just got $1 billion here, $1 billion there. That's the model.
Yeah.
So what do you offer in contrast to that economic model? Right? And so I get that, okay, there's this hardcore 38-40%. It's like, yes, I believe that economic model.
Sure.
And then there's okay, we want to be a kinder, gentler, kind of the space that I feel like Biden's kind of walking into. But at some point, you're going to have a conversation about what is that. What is wealth? What is community wealth? What does economic wealth look like? Because he's offering you a model. And it just happens to be this very racialized model. But man, we're comfortable with that. Let me just say, we're comfortable with that.
Absolutely,
racialized model.
And we have been, right?
Yeah. And in the absence of it, I'm scared. Like, wait, but I understand that one.
I get
I can be a poor white, I'm a poor white person, and I'm voting against my own interests because I believe if I pull myself up in the bootstraps, I'm like, no, you've been disenfranchised.
For multiple generations.
And you're still voting for your guy. So I think that, the contrast is what's allowing our work to actually accelerate. We have so much work that we cannot even get to. Like right before this meeting, we were triaging and I was working with my health equity person, which health equity bills could we support with our limited amount of energy and resources that we have, because we are prioritizing how much work there is to do. There is just so much work to do. Yeah. So, in terms of framing what happens to our goals, I think, we stay we're okay. We're solid in our goals. The work has just been multiplied and amplified.
That's a blessing. And what I'm hearing also, and it's something that we don't discuss enough, again, when we talk about really creating and driving for equity, we're talking about really shifting and engaging systems. A lot of times, these conversations, they start and stop at individuals, and then we get lost in the distraction of intentions. And it's okay, and if biases are conscious or unconscious, we don't talk about impact. We don't talk about, again, these models by which these things are really placed in, and how they drive inequity and disenfranchisement. So that's incredible. We're coming up close to the end of the interview. I want to give you a little bit of space to talk a little bit more about the Greenlining Institute, what you're excited about over the next, let's say over the next year. And then I'd like to give you some space to just any shout outs or parting words you got for us.
Oh, okay. So the next year, there is a deep conversation happening nationally about redressing segregation, that if we continue to live in segregated communities, in that, what do they say, on any given Sunday, we're the most segregated country in the world. There's a deep conversation about that and about community wealth. And I'm seeing both on in the academy, where a lot of research is being done, to the policymakers, to bankers. There's a conversation about now how do we really address affordability, homelessness, because they're all intertwined. Like, you can't have a conversation about affordable housing without talking about health equities and social determinants of health. And you can't talk about that without talking about access to broadband technology that's moving so quickly, but almost everything. I don't know about you, but I don't know the last time I went to a bank.
I have.
I do it all online.
My bank is on my phone, and you're absolutely
on your phone,
and
right?
And when you just to that point, like I think about. So I have the privilege of having a decent paying job, right? So I don't have issues with like using my data. I have unlimited data. I don't have issues with my Wi-Fi most of the time.
Right.
And if I do have issues, then I have the privilege of picking up a phone, demanding someone come and fix this, so I can get back to doing it. But when you talk about like this next generation of work, and like we talk about workforce of the future, and we talk about this digital age. There continue to be studies showing that Black and brown communities, economically distressed communities, are going to be left out of this age because we don't have the access to enter, right?
Yeah. So we have technology equity in our shop, and one of our biggest campaigns right now is broadband for all. And then another big pillar for us is algorithm bias, and that cuts across not just financial institutions, but medical bias in the algorithms that are, based on research in cancer. Well, guess what, that research was done around, middle-class white families. So the next, 12 months, I think this conversation is going to start to coalesce. I think there are going to be some common themes of how we can change the narrative on an economic sort of wealth, redefinition of wealth. I think that's really coming in the short term. I think the presidential outcome in November will also lay the ground for sort of that next level of work that's happening. So, 12 months, we're running hard for sure, grinding, and then we'll see if, heaven forbid, like you said, that Trump gets reelected or not, because that will require some activism. I think we're going to have to be that generation that, really takes to the streets, walks on the Capitol, boycotts, because if nothing else, you can imagine if we all decided one day to pull our money out of the banks. That's trillions of dollars. And so we might have, the activism may have to become real in the next 12 to 18 months if Trump is reelected. If not, I do think that the conversation, there's going to be some, this still has a conversation about, okay, what does affordability look like? Because the homelessness is not going away. We're one of the wealthiest states, and we're so troubled by it. Yeah. So I think that the conversation will continue, and we might as well grab hold of what we think wealth looks like. And like I said, it's the freedom to do a lot of things that you otherwise couldn't do. Call up your cable man or your repairman, like you have the freedom to do.
Like, yeah, hey, bro,
and I actually think. Yeah. And I actually think that's going to then build community, in that if I know that my mom is taken care of, or my dad has, can retire or comfortably, or my daughter who does not have the American dream of buying a house, like that's not, she's like, what?
Definitely not in California. No way.
No, that's not, it's not even a part of the dream, right?
No,
she's like,
I never think about that.
She's more aspirational of maybe starting my own company, or, traveling globally and spiritually. And I was like, wow, because that reality is not there for her. She's like, buy a home. It's not aspirational because it's not achievable.
Well, when you think about, like, I 100% hear you. The reason why I reacted when you said pull out the money from the banks, it's like, this is not like It's a Wonderful Life, right? Like, nobody's gonna be like, well, your money's at Ted's house, at Bill's house. Like, no, like the money, like if that was the type of protest, if that happened, like, oh my gosh, like, yeah. I mean, we got to have you back on and just talk about, like, even like just the concept of protest, because anyway, this has been a profound conversation, Debra.
Oh,
thank
excellent.
you. No, thank you so much. Y'all, this has been Living Corporate. You know what we do? We're having intentional, authentic, transparent conversations every day. Again, I really want to emphasize what I really have enjoyed about this conversation, and what I hope our listeners are grasping and understanding, is that shifting and creating equity and really having authentic conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion has to involve engaging and tackling systems, y'all. If we're not talking about engaging systems, we're not doing the work, right? So I know a lot of us, there are people who listen to this show who are like diversity, equity, and inclusion consultants, and like there are people who listen in who are trying to figure out and trying to get the secret sauce on like this next generation of workforce of the future. Like, y'all, if we're not willing to tackle and dismantle and or rebuild or like really think about these systems that are in play, we're not making change, y'all. Look, you can check us out on social media, Living Corporate _pod on Instagram at Living Corporate. And then look, if you just look, we're all over Al Gore's internet, right? For those of us who are blessed to have digital access, you just type in Living Corporate on Google, will pop up. But we have all the different domains, okay? So let me just rattle them off real fast, okay? You've got livingcorporate.co, livingcorporate.tv, livingcorporate.org, livingcorporate.net, livingcorporate.us. We have all the Living Corporate except livingcorporate.com, okay? But we have living-corporate. Please say the dash.com. All right, now we all over the place. And again, coming at y'all every week with this stuff. Today was a super dope conversation with the new CEO, Debra Gore-Mann of the Greenlining Institute, a policy, research, organizing, and leadership institute working for racial and economic justice. Make sure y'all check out the information in the show notes. Till next time, y'all. Peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.